If you slice the moon open right now, what's actually underneath? Most people picture the same lazy answer: a few centimeters of gray dust, then solid rock all the way down. Nothing else, nothing changing, ever. That assumption went almost untested for 50 years. Then a Chinese lander touched down on the moon's far side, aimed a radar straight into the ground beneath its own feet, and spent 18 minutes recording something nobody had ever captured before. A high-resolution picture of exactly what's stacked underground at the precise spot where samples were about to be drilled and packed for the trip home. It wasn't a hidden base. It wasn't proof of anything artificial. But once you understand what those echoes mean, it's easy to see why planetary scientists call it one of the more consequential lunar results in years, and why it quietly reshapes the case for where humans might eventually live on the moon. Want to know how things work before everyone else? You're in the right place. Liking this video takes just a second, but it's a massive motivation for us to keep making these breakdowns. Subscribe so you never miss an episode, and let's get into it. That mission was Chang'e 6, and the story starts with where it landed. On May 3, 2024, a Long March 5 rocket lifted off from the Wenchang launch site, carrying the spacecraft toward the moon. About a month later, on June 2nd, it set down inside the Apollo Basin, a crater sitting within the South Pole Aten Basin, an impact scar roughly 2,500 kilometers wide and one of the oldest, most battered regions anywhere on the lunar surface. Chang'e 6 went on to do something no mission ever had. It scooped up material from the far side and flew it back to Earth, 1,935.3 grams in total. But before a single scoop of soil was collected, the lander switched on a ground-penetrating radar and looked straight down. What it saw was a boundary. From the surface to about 1.7 meters down, the radar picked up a smooth, consistent layer, fine, powdery regolith that's been ground down over billions of years by micrometeorite strikes, radiation, and brutal temperature swings. Then, between roughly 1.7 and 3 meters, the signal changed completely, turning rougher and noisier, consistent with chunkier, less weathered debris, likely ejecta hurled there by ancient impacts and later buried under the dust. Picture flour poured over broken brick, soft and even on top, jagged and irregular the moment you dig past it. That's not a monster or a machine, it's a geological fingerprint, and it's exactly the kind of detail scientists had never been able to see directly at a sample site before. The tool behind this was a ground-penetrating radar array mounted around the drill, about 1.5 meters across and built from 12 antennas working in concert. Think fish finder, except instead of scanning water for bass, it scans rock and dust for buried boundaries. It fired pulses into the ground across a 1 to 3 gigahertz band. Whenever a pulse hit a change in material, part of it bounced back, and timing those echoes let engineers reconstruct a vertical slice of the subsurface, accurate to about 5 centimeters, down to roughly 3 meters. Cycling through all 12 antennas produced 132 separate traces in that one 18-minute session, effectively a 3D scan of the ground the drill was about to bite into. That mattered enormously for interpreting the samples themselves. Chang'e 6 wasn't scooping loose gray powder off a featureless plain. It was drilling into a site shaped by ancient lava, repeated impacts, and buried debris. Knowing whether the drill was passing through mature soil, chunks of old ejecta, or some mix of both gives scientists context they'd otherwise have to guess at, a three-dimensional map of exactly where in that stack their samples came from. And Chang'e 6 wasn't a one-off. It's the newest piece of a radar campaign China has quietly run for over a decade, adding up to something no other country currently has, an in-situ radar record of the moon's shallow interior spanning both hemispheres. Chang'e 3 started it in 2013 in Mare Imbrium, revealing layered ground and a hint of a small cavity near Ziwei crater, treated cautiously since it might just as easily be stacked boulders as an actual void. Chang'e 4 followed in 2019 as the first ever soft landing on the far side, inside Von Karman crater, mapping a regolith layer around 12 meters thick above buried lava flows, with structure tracked down to roughly 300 meters. Chang'e 5 in 2020 flew the first antenna array radar to another world, proving centimeter-scale imaging of shallow regolith was possible from a lander. Chang'e 6 then aimed that same technique at the most valuable site yet, the first far-side sample return zone in history. But the most tantalizing result from this radar program might not even be from Chang'e 6. In 2025, researchers re-examining Chang'e 4's U-22 rover data reported a candidate lava tube on the far side, roughly 130 meters underground, about 26 meters wide and 16 meters tall. Candidate is the operative word. It's unconfirmed, and the authors themselves note the same signal could be explained by dry, low-density material or buried boulders instead of a true hollow tunnel. Still, if it is a lava tube, formed when a lava flow's crust hardens while molten rock keeps draining out beneath it, the implications are big. Lunar surface temperatures swing from roughly 127 degrees Celsius in sunlight to minus 173 degrees Celsius in darkness, on top of constant radiation and micrometeorite bombardment. Meters of solid rock overhead would offer shielding no lightweight surface habitat can match, which is exactly why lava tubes keep coming up as candidate real estate for humanity's first long-term lunar shelters. China isn't alone in this. In 2024, University of Trento researchers Leonardo Carreras and Lorenzo Bruzzone reanalyzed 2010 radar data from NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter and published evidence in Nature Astronomy of an accessible cave conduit tens of meters long beneath the Mare Tranquillitatis pit on the near side, not far from where Apollo 11 landed. JAXA's Kaguya orbiter has separately picked up broad, deep subsurface reflectors under the lunar Maria, and even Apollo 17's orbital radar spotted basin-scale structure under Mare Serenitatis and Mare Crisium back in 1972. The key difference: NASA, Japan, and the Apollo-era instruments were all looking down from orbit, catching big, deep structures over huge areas, while China's landers and rovers have pressed radar directly against the ground at chosen sites on both hemispheres, yielding something orbital data can't: precise ground truth detail exactly where it's needed. There's a second, subtler payoff buried in the results. Radar signals lose strength as they pass through material, a property called loss tangent, and by comparing that loss across Chinese landing sites and old Apollo data, researchers Zhang Zhongyu and colleagues found it correlates with geological age. Older regolith, ground finer and more uniform by eons of impacts, seems to attenuate radar differently than younger, rougher terrain. If that relationship holds up at more sites, it hands orbital radar a rough way to estimate how old a buried surface is just from how it scatters a signal. Not unlike reading rings in a tree stump, except here the rings are hidden entirely underground. All of this sets up China's next move. Chang'e 7 is targeting a launch in the second half of 2026, with hardware already delivered to Wenchang for final testing and recent reporting pointing to an August window. Unlike its predecessors, it isn't built around another sample return. It's a full South Pole package: orbiter, lander, rover, and a hopping probe built to leap into permanently shadowed craters ordinary rovers can't reach, hunting for water ice. That matters because on the moon, water is infrastructure, drinkable, splittable into breathable oxygen, and potentially convertible into rocket propellant. A mission that can locate and characterize buried ice starts turning the moon from a place people visit into a place people could stay. So no, China hasn't found a monster or a machine under the moon's surface. What it found is less flashy and far more useful. Proof that the ground beneath the dust is layered, textured, and readable, stacked with ejecta, old lava, and possibly voids, like pages in a book nobody had opened before. And the more of that book China learns to read, the stronger its position becomes in deciding where and how the next era of lunar exploration actually begins.